Thanks for joining us. My name is Robert, and I have the joy of being the lead pastor here at Fellowship. And I want to encourage you, if there's a black Bible in the chairs around you, in front of you, behind you, somewhere, grab one of these black Bibles and turn to Mark chapter 5. It's page 833. We are going through a series through the gospel account of Mark. Now, this, as we've looked at, is really the account of Peter, one of Jesus' close disciples, as he was trying to explain it and having it written down by John Mark. And so as we've been journeying through this, we're getting a firsthand experience of what the ministry life of Jesus was like. And so we are now here in chapter 5, and if you don't have a Bible, this is yours to keep. Please take this. It's a gift to you. Or if you know someone who could use a Bible, take this Bible and give it to them. As I was preparing for this text, we're going to be going through the 20 verses here in Mark chapter 5. As I was preparing for this text, there was an example that came to mind, and I scratched my head and I said, do I give the example or not? And of course, it's a football example. So I have to. And number two, it's a Lions example. So now I really have to, because there's a big game tonight. Maybe you know, maybe you don't know. But then I saw Ron's picture up there, and I've met Ron a few times, but he's made it clear to me that he's a Vikings fan. So I'm very confused why he's now wearing Lions gear, but we'll have to figure that out next time I'm able to talk with him. Or it was Photoshopped. It's one of those. Like, I'm trying to figure that out. But as I go through this text, I'm reminded of what I teach even our young kids who are, I get the opportunity to coach in football, what I teach them all the time, and I've been the defensive coordinator for our team, and so I get to teach them how to tackle, how to hit, how to do all those kind of things. And my favorite thing to teach them is you get to be the hammer, not the nail. Maybe you've heard that expression. In football, you can either be the one who gives the hit, or you can be the one who receives the hit. If you look at NFL careers, did you know that the career lasts longer of a defensive player than an offensive player? The career lasts longer for that who hits someone than those who receive the hit. When I think of Jesus' ministry, I think all too often we look at him as the nail who just keeps getting hit, keeps getting hit, keeps getting hit. But Jesus in his ministry delivers the hammer. There are times where he goes out and he fights. There are times where he is expanding his kingdom. There are times where he is bringing light into the darkness. There are times where he sees the opponent ahead of him and he goes head on into that opposition with no fear. This is what I see in our text today. Now, bringing it home to our lovely Lions, we have a rich history of losing. In fact, this morning, part of our routine is checking last night's football scores with Alexa. So, Alexa, what was the score of the game? Then trying to wake our kids up with music. Well, one kid up with music, because the other one's always up. And so Jacob says, Alexa, play the Lions fight song, Gridiron Heroes. And of course, you never know what Alexa is going to play. Have you ever noticed that? And so Alexa has a Packers fan come on. And they say, let's talk about Detroit's winning history. And then they're like, here's the song. And that was it. That is our history, right? But we've kind of had that narrative start to change with the new head coach. And have you noticed what his mantra is? It's more about going out and being the aggressor rather than the one who is being hit time and time again. In fact, it was after their win against the Packers that people started asking him this year, well, what's it like to now have people noticing that you are no longer the hunter, but the one being hunted? You know, they had beat the Chiefs on the road. Now they had beat the Packers on the road. And this is what Dan Campbell said. Wise words from the head coach of the Detroit Lions. We're not the hunted because we're going to stay on the hunt. We've said that since training camp. If you are hunting us, you don't have to look for us. We're going to be on your front porch when you open the doors. I like it. Those are some fighting words. The reason I like it and the reason I'm using it is not just to fit a football analogy in. This is what I see Jesus doing in our text today. Jesus seemed to live by the same mantra. He was on a mission to advance his kingdom, and he wasn't backing away from anything or anyone. That's what our text is all about. Now, it's going to be a challenging text because we get to enter into the world of spiritual warfare, and that is something that honestly can give us fear and trembling because it is something in the unseen world. It is a battle that we can often feel like is out of our control. And so it's here in these first 5 verses, and we're going to break it down into 3 different sections, that we see this. Jesus confronts the demonic. Jesus doesn't back away from it. He doesn't shy away from it. In fact, he confronts it. It says they arrived on the other side of the lake. If you remember last week, where were they at? In the middle of the lake. And remember how we talked about how they were going from where there were Jews heavily present to where it was more Gentiles? And in this middle of the lake, there were other boats, and the storm came, and Jesus calmed the storm. Maybe recalling that text. And it happens in the middle of the lake. He's going from this Jewish area to a non-Jewish area. He was just with all these Jewish people, and he left because he had a mission that he had to accomplish. So now, on this mission, they leave. They're in the middle of the lake. He calms the storm while sleeping on a pillow first, right? And then they get to the other side, in the region of Gerasenes. And this is why we know this is a Gentile region. This is an area where non-Jews are the main population. When Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the burial graves and could no longer be restrained, even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrists and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. The word of the Lord. I say that because sometimes we read the Bible and it's just wild. This is wild. Jesus gets off the boat, steps onto the ground, and this is how the ESV puts it. In verse 2, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Welcome aboard, welcome to shore, Jesus. He steps on the shore, and all of a sudden, this wild, crazy, demonic, possessed man shows up. How would you act? If it were me, I'd probably get right back in the boat. Disciples, start going. We're going back. And this is why I think too often we see Jesus as the Jesus who holds the sheep, the Jesus who is timid, the Jesus, while he's humble and meek and mild in ways, he's also strong, courageous, and a warrior in other ways. Jesus does not back down from the situation. There's some key things for us to note. As Jesus is immediately confronted, the first thing we have to know is that this man is possessed by an evil spirit. This is not the man, this is the spirit. There is a difference at times. Sometimes we look and we say, well, this is because it's the man. No. There is a spirit that has possessed this man. It says when Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man what? Possessed by an evil spirit came out from the tombs to meet him. This is important for us to know because the context of it is that there is an evil spirit that is possessing this man. And the reality is we don't spend enough time talking about the evil spirits. Or on the other side, we spend way too much time talking about the evil spirits. It can go one or the other. On the one side, we can not talk about it at all, and I think we then live in a naive reality of what exists. And on the other hand, we can talk about it all the time, and now we become obsessed with it to the point that we even can get to the point we forget the reality of who conquers those evil spirits. C.S. Lewis, in his famous work, The Screwtape Letters, wrote this: "There are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence. The other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. They themselves are equally pleased by both errors and hail a materialist or magician with the same delight." In other words, Satan and his demons love it when we don't talk about him. Satan and his demons love it when all we do is talk about him. And we can sometimes land in both camps. But here's the reality: they exist. They existed in Scripture. They exist today. It is a reality of our world. Some of you have seen it far too often. Some of you maybe have lived in the naive world and you're saying, "Come on, don't ruin my joy here, Pastor Robert." But as Paul said, we don't fight against flesh and blood, but we fight against spiritual principalities of this dark world. We see it day in and day out. People are motivated by evil motives. Oftentimes we try to put what we see good in and of ourselves, even in the evil that we see. That happens. That's good for us to always want to find the good, but there is a reality that evil exists. So the man was possessed by this evil spirit. We have to understand that. The other thing we see here in verse 3 is that the man was isolated and impure. It says that the man lived in the burial caves and could no longer be restrained even with a chain. So here he is living in the graveyard, in, let's just say, the cemetery. And so this all of a sudden made him unclean to any Jewish person, because Jewish people did not associate with dead bodies. You just didn't. And so here he is impure because of this, but he's also isolated because who lives in the tombs? Let's just be honest, right? It's a weird place to be living. And the third thing we have to understand is that the evil spirit was stronger than human strength. Verse 4 said, "Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrists and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him." I'm reminded of an Old Testament person who had this out-of-the-world strength. Do you know who I'm talking about? Samson, right? And he had the ability to even knock down an entire building with the power of God. Sometimes the spiritual powers make us stronger or more mighty than any physical strength that we have. Here we see this man cannot be subdued by anything. Even if man tries to put chains on the man, even if they try to put shackles on him, what does he do? He breaks out of them. This is a power that man cannot contain. I want you to just picture this scene now. This is scary. This is not just some little incident, cute little story. There is something serious happening here. But as I look at the situation, and as I look at these first few verses, I came away with this one main takeaway. The man was living in isolation. And when we talk about spiritual battles, when we talk about evil, there's one thing that I find constantly tends to be a common denominator. Satan loves to prey on those who are isolated. I say often, what is the most powerful part of the church? And I believe it's community. It's having brothers and sisters who can come alongside one another and encourage one another, who can build one another up, who can fight the good fight together, who can say, "I've been there, I've experienced that," who can cry with one another and celebrate with one another. It's being able to have that place where you can come together and you can worship God in harmony, in unity, in oneness. And you can go out into this dark world and you can know that you have a body of believers that is with you fighting the same fight. But then the dangerous spot comes when we say, I don't need my church community. I just need God. Me and God, we're good. All of a sudden, we've lost accountability. All of a sudden, we've lost community. All of a sudden, we've lost a support system that God had intended for us. And now we live in isolation. And time after time when we get isolated, this is where Satan loves to attack us. He attacks our mind. He attacks our motives. He attacks everything that we might not even know he's about to attack. And evil loves to attack us when we're away from community. Evil also, if you look in verse 5, has a way of causing us to break free, not to freedom, but to self-harm. What I find really interesting about this text is when he breaks the chains, look at what he does. Verse 5 says, day and night he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. I don't know about you, but when I think of freedom, I don't think of self-harm. But there's times where people who, when they get freedom, especially when they have the evil that is motivating them, their freedom is dictated in destruction. Well, what do you think Satan wants us to do? Destroy ourselves. That's the freedom he has to offer you. Sounds great, right? Sounds fantastic. And I've seen this be a really real issue. When I was in youth ministry, I can't tell you how many different people were struggling with the whole thing of inflicting harm on themselves. And we tried to walk alongside them, and we were able to show them the love of Jesus, and we were able to work through those. But the reality is, we see time and time again, evil loves to destroy oneself. I'm reminded of 1 Kings chapter 18. This is an interesting chapter in the Old Testament, where this is where Elijah is challenging the people worshiping Baal of whose God is greater. Yahweh, the one true God, Elijah's God, or the God that they worshiped. Maybe you recall this story. And as they're trying to have their gods show that they exist and are real, the people who are worshiping Baal become all the more desperate for Baal to show himself. And verses 28 and 29 say this: they shouted louder, and following their normal custom, they cut themselves with knives and swords until the blood gushed out. That sounds horrible. They raved all afternoon until the time of evening sacrifice. So, think about this. They're cutting themselves. They're raving. They're howling. What is this man doing? Does it not seem very similar in our text? Baal, they're worshiping this God that is not really God. But look at this. Still, there was no sound, no reply, no response. Destructive nature of the demonic is clear throughout the Bible. We see this in the Old Testament. Here we see it in the Gospel account of Mark. We see it with Satan in the garden, trying to offer something to Adam and Eve that is ultimately to mankind's demise. But God doesn't offer us that same type of thing. He desires for us to have love and freedom, while Satan desires for you to have destruction and depravity. The demon-possessed man was unclean. He lived in the tomb. He had contact with dead bodies that made him unclean. In fact, in Numbers 5:2, it says, "Command the people of Israel to remove from the camp anyone who has a skin disease or a discharge, or has become ceremonial unclean by touching a dead person." He was also considered unclean because he was a Gentile, most likely based on the region that he was in. Yet Jesus went right into the situation. Think about that. What Jew would do that? What good Jew would do that? Jesus did. And Jesus got out of his boat, was confronted. In fact, Jesus got out of his community that people were following, the crowds were gathering, and he took the boat to the other side where he knew he would be confronted by this. That is someone who I look at and I say, he is being a hammer and not a nail. Because you know what we see next in verses 6 to 13? Jesus conquers the destructive. He didn't just go to show us that it exists. He went to show us that he has power over it and that he conquers it. It is in verse 6 to 7 that it says, when Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him, and bowed low before him. Now, in this text, it's really challenging because it kind of switches the narrative between what is the demon-possessed man, what is the man, what is, like, it's very hard to follow that sometimes. But this is what I see if I take, like, a high level. All of a sudden, this man sees Jesus, and he bows before him. And with a shriek, he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" See, this speaking part is where I see the demonic coming out, right? I see the demonic coming and saying, "Why are you messing with us? Why are you interfering with us? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." Here's what I see happen. The man saw Jesus. He runs to meet Jesus, and then he bows before Jesus. To everyone else, he broke the chains. To Jesus, he bows. In fact, the Greek word that is used here is actually the word to worship, to bow as an act of allegiance or in regard. Why would a man possessed by demons bow before Jesus? Just ask yourself that question. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem logical, does it? But we begin to see. Because there is an understanding of who Jesus is and the power he possesses. Did you notice that they say, "Why are you interfering? I beg you, don't torture me." There is a power that Jesus has that they know exists there. There was another time where Jesus interacted with the demonic, and we found that in Mark chapter 1. In this text, it says, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" In Mark 1, verse 24, when we see an interaction, it says, "Why are you interfering with us, Jesus of Nazareth?" Remember, this is the guy who's at the synagogue. "Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." This is how we actually can know there's a difference between Gentile and Jew, the way Jesus is referred to. See, the Jewish reference is the Holy One of God. That's what we found in Mark 1. Where was the context? Where was the man? He was in the synagogue. What is our context here? It says what? Jesus, Son of the Most High God. Why did they say that? Because in the Gentile world, they had many gods. And they're talking about him being the Most High God. There's something for us to understand here. I think of Paul when he was in Athens. And he says, "You have all these gods, but let me tell you about the one who's the unknown God." Even for those who haven't worshiped the same God we worship, they've always left room for him. Have you ever noticed that? In Islam, there is room for Jesus. In atheism, people will acknowledge the existence of Jesus. In any world religion, no one will say, "How dare you talk of Jesus?" The time that there is the divide is when you say he is God himself. That's when it gets divisive. So this very Jewish understanding of Jesus, as we had seen previously, is different from what we see now. This was a Gentile understanding. And what I find happens in both contexts, whether the Jewish one or here in the Gentile one, the same question is asked: "Why are you interfering with me?" Throughout Mark's gospel account, the humans seem to be confused about who Jesus is, even his disciples. Who is this man that can still the sea? Who is this man that can heal? Who is this person? And all the human interaction seems to be that of a question, who is this man? Yet whenever there is spiritual, demonic references, it is very clear who Jesus is. And there is no question. That's why you see, in the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me. I always read these texts and I ask the question, why would they ask that? They clearly knew who Jesus was. They clearly knew the mission he was on, and they clearly knew the power that he had. Well, the people in Mark's text are still trying to figure it out. The demons know perfectly clear who he is and what he is going to do. The text clarifies for us that Jesus had commanded the demons to come out of the man already. There is power in Jesus' command, and the demons could do nothing to stop Jesus' power. They could try to negotiate with him, but that was it. Mark 5, 8-13 says this, "For Jesus had already said to the spirit, 'Come out of the man, you evil spirit.' Then Jesus demanded, 'What is your name?' And he replied, 'My name is Legion, because there are many of us inside this man.' Then the evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them into some distant place. There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby. 'Send us into those pigs,' the spirits begged. 'Let us enter them.'" Now, what's about to happen in our next text, some of you animal lovers are not going to like it. Notice the motivation behind it. Who is asking for this to happen? The demons. Some of you bacon lovers are going to wonder, what is going to happen and why waste? So Jesus gave them permission. You notice that? Jesus ultimately still has to give them permission. He still has power over them. But does it not also show Jesus' desire to give people, even evil, free will? You want to have it that way? You can have it that way. The evil spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the entire herd, about 2,000 pigs, that is a lot of pigs, plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned in the water. Take a moment of silence for those pigs. This is crazy. Is this not an intense text, if we're to be honest about it? But Jesus was not only cleansing the man, he was cleansing the land. This is important for us to understand. He's entering into Gentile territory. And here he not only comes to heal the man of the demons that possess him, he is here to show his kingdom is conquering the land upon which they live. There can be a parallel drawn from this text to that of what happens when God's people flee out of Egypt. In fact, Exodus chapter 15 is what we call the Song of the Sea. And in it, the first verse says, "I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. He has hurled both horse and rider into the sea." Who was the enemy? It was the Egyptians who were pursuing, right? Who is the enemy here? It is the demonic who is possessing. And what is Jesus saying? He's like, just like I had power then, I have power now. And I will hurl them into the sea, just like I did when I set you free out of Egypt. Just as God had done for Pharaoh's army, he is setting the man and he's setting the land free. We also see in the next closing verses of our passage that Jesus then goes on to commission the delivered. This is what verses 14-20 read. "The herdsmen fled into the nearby town and the surrounding countryside, spreading the news as they ran. People rushed out to see what happened. So imagine these people who are herding their pigs all of a sudden see their livelihood go off a cliff and into the water. I think they're pretty ticked. Just going to say. And so they go around and they're telling people, this Jesus, he's amazing. No. I don't think that's what we see in our text. They're going around and they're saying, how could he do this? He has taken away our livelihood. I see that because the people rushed out to see what happened. And a crowd soon gathered around Jesus. And they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons. He was sitting there fully clothed. That's a good thing. And perfectly sane. And they were all afraid. Why are they afraid of a sane man? Because he was changed. You ever notice that sometimes people fear you when you first came to Christ? Because all of a sudden, you're sane. The old is gone and they're like, how are you not that way anymore? All of a sudden, you're this way. I don't understand it. Because you found Jesus. And there's a peace about you that they can't comprehend. They only understand your life of chaos without Jesus. And now all of a sudden you have a peace that surpasses understanding. And they don't get it. So here we have a sane man who's been delivered by Jesus, healed by Jesus, and they can't comprehend it. Then those who had seen what happened told the others about the demon-possessed man and the pigs. Verse 17. And the crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and leave them alone. This is why I don't think they were going around saying, look how great Jesus is. They're going around saying, look what he did to this man and to our land. I find that all too often, when we experience the power of the kingdom of Jesus advancing, when we experience the power of Jesus or his kingdom advancing here on earth, all too often the cry of others can be, get away from me. I want nothing to do with it. And that's what we see happening. It was clear that people are saying, just get away from us. And how too often do you maybe have that encounter with someone when you try to share your faith? I don't want to hear it. I don't want to talk about it. I'll think about it when I'm dead, basically, is what they say. Just get away from me. It could be because Jesus destroyed their livelihood. And I think that's what people are fearful of when it comes to Jesus today. What change am I going to have to make because of Jesus? I like my life. I like the things I have. I like living for the world. How dare I be asked to live for something other than myself? Yet I find that the way there's an easier answer than this, what I really believe happened is they saw the power of Jesus and they didn't know what to do with it. The disciples are left out of this story. Did you ever notice that? Yet they would have been on the boat. But how were they left when he calmed the sea? Were they full of joy? No, it tells us they were afraid. Now the Gentile people see the power of Jesus. And what do they have? Fear. I think of that person who makes that nice hit in a football game. You don't want to be hit by them again, right? One of the proudest moments of my life, okay, I'm very exaggerating with this, but a proud moment, as defensive coordinator in a small little, second and third grade football, I get to be on the field with the team. And my older son plays outside linebacker. And the star running back from this team comes down and he lights the kid up. And he says, I'll be here all day. And then he comes another play later and he lights him up again. And he says, there's more dog left in me. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm proud of you, man. But I'm also thinking, where did you learn those words from? Like, I don't talk like that, right? But do you think they kept running to his side of the field after that? No, right? I'm not saying that to be, he missed a lot of tackles too, all right? But here's the reason I'm saying that. When there is fear struck into someone, oftentimes you try to avoid it. But yet Jesus, he doesn't come to just put this fear into us. He comes to change our circumstances for the better. His kingdom is bringing light into the darkness. His kingdom is about advancing good and love and peace. It's about advancing God's goodness itself. There's the people, and then there's the healed man. As you think of the difference between the two, there's an illustration that I kind of thought of, and it's where you wake up in the middle of the night. And have you ever noticed you can wake up in the middle of the night? I feel like I'm getting older by the day because I think I wake up 2 or 3 times a night now. And you make that trek to the bathroom. It's like you can see perfectly. Have you ever noticed that? Like you just, it's like, I got it. No question. Oftentimes when we live in the world without Jesus, it's like walking around in the middle of the night. We think we can see perfectly. But when someone flips on those lights in the morning, what happens? Turn them off. I can't deal with it. I don't want to open my eyes. Stop it. I feel that's all too often our walk with Jesus. There's times where we're like, I'm navigating just fine. I know how to get to the bathroom. But when that light hits us, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that is more blinding than I ever imagined. But do you need light to be able to see? Oh, you see things so much more clearly when you have the light than when you don't. So then you have the story of the healed man. And it's here that we conclude our passage. Verse 18 says, as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. You have the people who are saying, get away from us. You have the healed man who's saying, what? I want to come with you, Jesus. But Jesus said to him, no, go to your family. Tell them everything the Lord has done for you, how merciful he has been. Jesus all of a sudden says, no, don't come with me. Go to them. In Mark, there's a common theme. Jesus often will empower those who have been healed to go and tell others, and he'll tell his disciples to stay quiet or to stay with him. That's kind of what we see happening throughout Mark. So the man started off to visit the 10 towns, the Decapolis of that region, and began to proclaim the great things Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed at what he told him. The healed man went on to become an evangelist for Jesus. When you're changed by Jesus, you can't help but share it with everyone you know. All of a sudden, your life has changed, and Jesus is saying, go tell others about what has happened. So I don't know what circumstance you've been in, what you're struggling with, but let me encourage you. Just like that man, Jesus desires to set us free. But when he sets us free, and when he has set us free, I believe we also have a duty and a responsibility to tell everyone we know about that freedom he's given us. We all have a different story, and we all come from a different background. But what unites us as believers is the one who has brought us here together, and that is Christ himself. And so my question is, how has Jesus set you free? Go and share it. Will you pray with me?